doors opened in 1874 with a simple goal: to educate students. But there's always been more to it than that. When the world battled its neighbors, McAllister raised the United Nations flag. When others said no, McAllister said yes. When division and discrimination plagued this country, McAllister alumni and students organized and took action.
We are not complacent.
We are not apathetic.
You, out there, have made a difference. In your neighborhood, in your town, in your city, and beyond. So, for all the learners, for all the mentors, for all of us everywhere asking big questions, thank you.
Thank you for not just asking why, but also what's next. Thank you for launching our mission into the world. Thank you for continuing to support that mission. Every day, for every student whose aim is to lift up, to change, to discover, to reimagine.
To make this a place where we all belong.
A place where education is just the beginning.
Aloha from Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm Julian Ako from the McAllister class of 1965. It is MAC's practice to begin its programs with a land acknowledgement. Let's take a moment to recognize the fact that McAllister is on Dakota land. This is the ancestral homeland of the Dakota people who were forcibly exiled from their land as a part of aggressive and persistent settler colonialism. MAC makes this acknowledgement to honor the Dakota people, their ancestors and descendants, as well as the land itself. As an indigenous Native Hawaiian, I am on the land of the Kanaka-Oiwi, the descendants of the people who traveled across the Pacific Ocean in double-hulled canoes and were the first people of Hawaii. The history of my Native people greatly mirrors that of the Dakota people, whose land was also taken from them and who also found themselves marginalized in their homeland. McAllister recognizes that this land acknowledgement itself is not enough and only serves as a first step towards decolonization. Aloha.
Good evening, and welcome to this evening's Big Question program. My name is Erik Christensen. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a member of the class of 1995 and recently completed a term of service on the alumni board. Before we continue, if you'll allow me, a few obligatory shout outs. A warm welcome to all past and present residents of Second Turk, a wink and a nod to the QU folks, and a virtual stairwell first tenor reach to all my trads out there. Hashtag Bad Boys of Acapella, hashtag Trads for Life. Those of you who met me at MAC were meeting me during some of the least religious years of my life. Following graduation, I used my psychology degree to do work with runaway and homeless youth, as well as youth experiencing violence at home or in their intimate relationships, before heading off to seminary at Emory University in Atlanta, and being ordained as an out gay Lutheran pastor in the years before my denomination's policies allowed for public ministry by LGBTQIA+ people. As a result, I bring to my current work as pastor to the community and director of worship at the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, one of the seminaries of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, a long-standing interest in how religious and civic life intersect, and in the power of faith-rooted community organizing to contribute to social progress and the common good. For all these reasons and more, I'm really excited for tonight's conversation about religion and politics. There are, of course, some obvious changes in tonight's format. Unfortunately, we're not able to be physically together on campus. But the McAllister community is united together here this evening, and it's great to be in community with all of you. Thanks for joining us. Before we begin, let me share a few technical details with you all. First, if you have any questions or technical difficulties, no fear. You can chat Mac Help staff directly from the platform, or using your mobile phone, text the phone number 651-204-3910 for assistance to contact our tech support team directly. We've allocated plenty of time this evening, both for questions you might have shared during registration, as well as live questions you might submit this evening using the Q&A box. I'll be sharing who's asking the question, so if you could share your name and pronunciation with your question, that'll help me out. Toward the end of the program, we'll also use the chat feature to share information and additional links with you, so look for that. Please be aware that today's program is being recorded and will be available online on the Big Questions webpage. Finally, after the event, we'll have time for networking and continued conversation. All of our speakers will move over to Remo for virtual networking tables, and a link will be shared in the chat and was in your confirmation email. We hope you can join us there. Wrestling with big questions often leads to those breakthrough McAllister moments, connecting people with one another, to faculty, and to the work of the college. We're thrilled to have McAllister President Suzanne Rivera leading the Big Question conversations this year. As we continue to welcome her to McAllister, we appreciate her leadership, especially now as we navigate everything happening in the world around us. She is excited to continue to meet alumni and parents around the globe online until we can connect in person again. The Big Questions program brings the gifts of scholarship to critical and difficult issues and conversations. We're fortunate that President Rivera will bring her bioethicist's lens to the discussion as our host tonight, as we explore the question, how does religion influence contemporary politics? While the United States does not have an official religion, it's hard to find another country that is as public about its dominant religion. Religion has fueled progressive social and civil rights movements, influencing everything from citizenship and voting rights to controversial Supreme Court decisions. It has also contributed to sectarian movements and provided theological, political, and material support to white supremacy, corroding democracy. All of which leads us to ask, does religion enhance or degrade ethical and political decision-making? Joining President Rivera in tonight's conversation are Dr. William Hart, McAllister's Margaret W. Harmon Professor of Religious Studies and Chair of the Department, and Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman, Class of 1981 and Senior Rabbi of Temple Israel in Minneapolis. This will surely be a great conversation. So with that, President Rivera, I turn the program over to you.
Just getting COVID safe here with our masks, and there we go. Thank you very much for that introduction, Erik. Welcome to all. I am so delighted to be with you today, those who are here on campus and those who are dialing in from around the world. I'm thrilled that we get to have this conversation with Professor Hart and Rabbi Zimmerman at a time when questions about religion and politics are top of mind. It's a well-known aphorism that there are two things you should not talk about in polite company: religion and politics. I guess this is because some people think it's not possible to talk in a polite way about different perspectives. But we at McAllister think that the most important conversations are those that focus on topics that people view differently. And we think vigorous conversations, even those that may create discomfort, can help us learn and help us grow. So tonight, we're going to take on two topics that are at the center of many disagreements in our country and around the world: religion and politics. I think I'm going to open today's conversation with a really broad question, and I'm going to start with you, Professor Hart. Everyone has their own definition of what they think religion is. How do you define religion? Is it the same as spirituality, or would you draw a distinction there? What do you think?
Well, I actually have two definitions of religion, a narrow definition and a broad definition. The narrow definition is this: religion is an abstract concept that describes a socially prescribed effort to avoid bad things and obtain good things by aligning ourselves with superhuman powers. Now, that's an academic sort of description, and people might say, well, I don't recognize religion in that. And what I would argue is that that's the core function of religion. But for the fact that humans call upon superhuman powers, all of the creedal, ritual, and institutional expressions of religion would not exist. Broadly speaking, I find the thinker Michel Foucault's notion of discourse useful, so I also define religion as a discourse, that is, a relationship between words and things within which the whole range of themes, concepts, objects, and subject positions that arise in a multiplicity of religions can be described. I find it impossible to really describe the complex phenomena of religion without working between the narrow and the broad definition. Regarding the relationship between religion and spirituality, I have two views there as well. On the one hand, I see spirituality as religion light. I see religion as, spirituality as a phenomenon of, that is, spirituality is distinct from religion as a phenomenon of liberal modernity. It's an expression of individualism. It's people who might have been reared within a religious tradition but no longer want to subscribe to the disciplines of that tradition. I also think of spirituality as something that's actually broader than religion, with religion simply being one of many expressions of spirituality.
Thank you. And how about you, Rabbi Zimmerman? What's your take on this question?
Oh, it is great to be back at McAllister. Wow, Dr. Hart, that's amazing. The vast possibility. I am a practitioner. I am a leader of a religious community. And so on that front line of being there for people at liminal moments in their lives, life cycle events, it is very powerful to be at the bedside of someone who is dying and to be able to say a blessing and to allow them to leave this world with a comfort and a serenity. I have countless times been called to the bedside where somebody is anxious and a prayer can truly settle. And I think that it's those moments where religion are quite powerful and are real and are important. This time of COVID, being together in a time where we often hear people say, what is happening? How did this happen, right? And so the container of religion and ritual and symbol that we know are very powerful in religious definition, right? We know that symbols can be very powerful for good and for bad. And so it is the power of the weekly observance of Shabbat in Judaism, if I'm going to get very particular, that allows people to be settled in this time where we're not sure what day it is or what time it is because our usual routines are out of order. For me, religion orders chaos. It allows people the comfort of time. It allows people the comfort of coming together as a community, and yes, to a higher power, whatever that might be. Now, spirituality can be obtained definitely without religion, and religious community can come together in a way that is new and emergent. And so the complexity of religion makes it so exciting for me as a rabbi. I really actually like to be in the world of mystery over mastery. And for me, that's religion.
Thank you for that. So that makes me wonder what you each think about. Your answers had to do with individual people's relationships to religion. Do we think religion plays other roles in the world other than, for example, the comfort or the meaning that it brings to an individual who engages with it? In what other ways is religion operating in the world today?
Well, for me, religion is a socially prescribed practice. So in the first instance, I focus on religion as a social phenomenon within which various kinds of individual experiences might be had. So, I guess I just wanted to sort of clarify that. Given my broad definition of religion, I don't think that hard and fast distinctions can be made between religion and other aspects of culture. I mean, that is one of the questions in religious studies. Does it make sense for us to delimit a phenomenon that we call religion and that we can somehow, distinguish as a sphere that's separate from, larger cultural expressions?
And I know from our preparatory conversation, Rabbi Zimmerman, that you also had something to say about this relationship between religion and culture, especially as it pertains to Judaism.
So, Judaism is an ancient Eastern religion. It is not a Western modern religion. We have many Jews who live in a Western modern world, and we have adapted and adopted. But Judaism truly is an ancient culture, ethnicity, religious tradition that is all intertwined. I like to say it's under one big umbrella, not compartmentalized, that religion can somehow be separated from culture or ethnicity or food or language. And so for me, that's the power of Judaism and its history, is that it has gone through so many historic realities. Jews have experienced so much historically, and it is a vast and deep well of knowledge and wisdom that we draw from at different times, sometimes highlighting one thing for a particular period of time and a need, and another time looking and highlighting another part of it. It is a deep well because it is ancient in that way. So I think that, for me, is really what's important. And I feel like the 21st century is calling upon us to have a more integrated perspective on religion and culture and ethnicity, or whatever we might see it as. But for me, it is calling on me as a rabbi to be much more integrated and not to separate and compartmentalize.
So let's try to focus in on the United States for a minute here. We're having a moment. In the U.S., we say on paper that we have a separation of church and state, but in what ways do you think that's true and not true? Go ahead,
Well, I mean, I
Professor.
don't think it's ever been true. I think we have to distinguish between separation of church and state and non-establishment of religion. They're not exactly the same thing. But even with respect to non-establishment, which simply says that there won't be an official, the language then was church or an official religion, my view is that there is a deep religion in the United States. There always has been a deep religion. That deep religion is Protestant Christianity. That deep religion shapes what we take religion to be, and it also influences who we regard as truly American in a first-class and unqualified sense. And this is not new. We see this with respect to the way in which Catholics were received in this country. We see it less intensely around the presence of Jews in this country. And then I think we really see it in what I call, this trajectory, this historical trajectory of Mormon-Muslim paranoia, the kind of state-religion conflict around the way Mormons were treated in the 19th century, the way Muslims are being treated in the 21st century. There's a connection, a trajectory between those two. And in each case, Mormons and Muslims, in exercising their free expression of religion, pushed up against the norms of American identity, which, as I indicated, are Protestant and which also live in Protestant Christianity's era, which is political liberalism.
So, Rabbi Zimmerman, how do you understand the relationship between religion and American national identity?
So I think the way that Erik began by saying the dominant religion, right? And I think that's exactly what Dr. Hart is talking about as well. And I find it so interesting because, when I was growing up in high school, we used to have this exercise, are you a Jewish American or are you an American Jew? And we would have to, as teenagers, go to one side of the room or the other. And so this is not a new phenomenon for us and the Jewish community, because where are you putting the emphasis? Where's your identity? And the question in high school as well, I go back, could the Holocaust ever happen in this country? Oh my goodness, my in-laws are Holocaust survivors, and they are no longer alive, but I don't know what their reaction or response would have been to the events at the Capitol on January 6th. And so here we are, and for the first time I can say, I think it could, yes, it could happen here. And what does that mean? And what is that all about? So I totally agree that Protestant Christianity is the dominant religion, and there are times that there is no separation of church and state. There are moments where we have seen that, and they are dangerous moments.
Well, so I think we're all in agreement that religion influences politics in the U.S. Do we think religion is inherently political? I'll kick it back to you, Rabbi Zimmerman. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't know. My husband also graduated from, is an alumni of Macalester College and is an elected official at Representative Frank Hornstein. And he always introduces me as, when he introduces me down at the Capitol, as his wife, who is a rabbi and has more politics in her job than I do in mine. So, yes, anytime you have people together, there's politics, right? I mean, that just is probably a broadest definition of politics. But what I can say is that I'm often critiqued, and not, by some people who say, don't be political from the Bema rabbi. And it often means I don't agree with your politics, rabbi. But it is this interesting notion of where we are, right? So don't talk about it. Is there any neutrality? Elie Wiesel said, neutrality helps the oppressor, not the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, not the tormented. And so there is no neutrality and there's no possibility of it. And for me, the question is, how does one's religion, how does one's tradition fuel their desire for a just society, for speaking on behalf of the victims, standing alongside in witness of those who have not been given the opportunity that others have? How do we do that in a religious voice is the most profound. And of course, community organizing is at the center of what I learned at Macalester College. It's creating community in order to change this world and not settle for what is. That is very religious in my mind.
So taking that definition, if religion is inherently political because it's about how we interact with one another and how we should organize ourselves and how we should be, in what ways are our politics in the U.S. based on specific religious ideologies, and is that inherently problematic?
Well, I mean, America itself is a religion. We can put it that way. We can say America has a religion, a formal religion. It also has a civil religion. We can also say that America is an expression of religion. We see that in sacred objects like the flag, in sacred spaces, in founding fathers, in sacred civic texts like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And we see it in the deep mythology that shaped this country. People who settled in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Puritans and their more radical Pilgrim kin, saw themselves as the new Israel. And they saw themselves as conquering a new land of Canaan, a new promised land. And so there's always been this conquering redeemer mythology at work in American society. The new Israel and the messianic nation are what I call the conquering, redemptive, sort of mythology that surrounds America. There's also the notion that goes all the way back to the Pilgrims that America is a city on a hill, or a new version of Augustine's, city of God. And we see how this shapes our politics. I remember in 1980, both President Ronald Reagan and the Democratic candidate for president, Governor Mario Cuomo, both made reference to America as a city on a hill. So America itself is a religious mythology, a story it tells about itself and about its divinely guided origins.
Rabbi Zimmerman, you talked about Judaism as an ancient religion from which we can draw wisdom. And I want to talk a little bit about how religious traditions and teachings can help us form views about moral virtues, introduces us to ethical viewpoints. Certainly many people without faith in a higher power also can be devoted to practicing or fostering what we might consider moral virtues. But I wonder how you understand the relationship between religion and ethics.
Very good question. It is, again, the idea of what it means to be your sort of best self, individually, communally. Judaism has this great midrash, which is a legend, and it talks about us being partners with God, right? So what it says, why doesn't God give us loaves of bread on the ground so that we can just eat a loaf of bread, but instead wheat that we make into bread? And the answer from the rabbis is that so that we can be partners with God. And while I think that is the idea of what it means to be ethical, right? It means, according to Judaism, how are you, B'Tselem Elohim, God is created, you're partially created with God inside of you. It's feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, providing shelter for the homeless, and taking in someone who needs your help. So the morality and the ethics of caring for the common good is a part of religious traditions. Now, have religious traditions been at the source of bad? Absolutely. No question. I would not tell you differently historically. Have the traditions, there's always an inside and an outside, and if you cut that so intensely, then you've got a problem. David Stendel-Rast, who's among, I don't know if any of you know him, he's incredible. Gratitude.com is his website, and he talks about gratitude. And he talks about the fact that religion, every religion, we talked a little bit about this when we met earlier, that every religion began with a miracle, and it's sort of like a volcano, the lava inside the volcano. It's flexible, It's open, it's welcoming, it's like miraculous. You know, when you've experienced something that is heartfelt, you are open, you are not closed. He says, then what happens with religion over time is that it bubbles over and it becomes rock and it becomes rigid. And that is the organization of religion, and that is a problem, right? So he talks about people who saw the miracle are sold. The first generation who hear the firsthand narratives are sold. It's the third generation that gets the rock, and it's rigid and it's hard and it's so overly organized that it becomes this very ugly reality. And that's, so how do we keep miracles and keep this idea going, and how do we renew it over and over and over again so that it doesn't get rigid, it doesn't become the problem, but that it actually becomes part of the solution to the problems we have?
Well, so it sounds like you think religion can enhance ethical decision making. I wonder from your perspectives, if you think if we didn't have religion, would we have moral values?
Often I will get an earnest undergraduate in my classes who's read Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, and just to paraphrase one of the characters in the novel, Ivan, who says something to the effect that if there is no God, then everything is permitted, which is interpreted to mean that if there is no God, then there's no morality. And I always have to disabuse those students of that view. Ethics emerges in many contexts. Religion is only one context in which ethics emerge. Ethics are older than religion. Ethics emerge within religious traditions. They also emerge against religious traditions. Sometimes we make ethical judgments against religious traditions, or we have ethical objections to moral claims that are made within religious traditions. So ethics, short answer, do not depend upon religion. Ethics emerge anywhere where people ask the question, how should we live? It emerges in any context where people say that some current state of affairs ought not be. Any time we use the language of ought, any time we say that something ought or ought not to be, we're engaged in an ethical discourse, and it does not depend on religion. Furthermore, I think that ethically speaking, religion is an index of human nature and behavior. So I always like to tell people that in religion, you find people at their very best and at their very worst. You find them at their self-sacrificial and other regarding best, and at their cruelest and genocidal worst. It doesn't get any better than that, or worse.
And I would just jump in to say that Judaism has 613 commandments, because Judaism doesn't trust human beings to always be the best of themselves. So if your ox scores my ox, Judaism tells you what to do about that, right? If you find a dog, or, okay, there probably weren't dogs then. If you find a cow in the middle of your backyard and you don't know who owns it, there are requirements of how you have to take care of that animal in order to return it to its owner. And anything that is produced has to go back to its owner as well. So there is the acknowledgement for sure that human beings have good and bad in them. That is the root of Judaism. We can be angelic and we can be horrific, and the balance between the two. And horrific isn't horrible all the time, right? So we talk about a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, but it also makes us competitive, and competition can be really good. So it's not that we all want to be good. Judaism doesn't want that. Judaism doesn't talk a lot about love. We have law. So we understand that people, it can be the best of themselves, the worst of themselves. The ethics are in the law in Judaism. So I think that's the other piece of this story.
That's great. All right, well, returning to contemporary U.S. politics, I want to ask, there's been a lot written lately about the rise of the religious right in the U.S., and so I wonder if either of you sees a countervailing movement of a sort of religious left forming and being active, and what that may portend.
Yeah.
Well, there have always been religious liberals. I think it's harder to talk about a religious left. I don't think that there's a religious left that's comparable in size, say, to the religious right. I think that there is a liberal religious formation that's comparable in size to the religious right. We take someone, for example, I'm repressing his name right now, I don't know why, the leader of the Moral Mondays movement, and who's leading a new Poor People's Campaign to Washington, D.C. He's clearly a member of the liberal religious formation, but I don't think there's anything comparable on the left to the religious right.
Do you agree, Rabbi Zimmerman?
It's interesting that it may be in defining moments, I guess. Since 2016, I was going to say, just look at my children. The idea of what they believe, that going on the streets, wolf bullhorns, speaking out, since the election of 2016, without question, they've been on the streets. They are, believe that populism needs to fight populism. And they are in the fight. One of them is a graduate of McAllister, and did her own little fight there as well. You weren't the president.
A time-honored tradition.
A time-honored tradition, exactly. And so, what did they say at the very beginning on that video? Not apathetic. So, I mean, but if we start talking about numbers, then that's an interesting point, Dr. Hart. That I haven't thought of it in that way, but I see that there is a new movement afloat. And it is hard-hitting and intense, and is unapologetic about it in a way that is amazing.
So maybe there's something generational happening here that, maybe if we asked current students what they thought about this question, we might get different answers. It makes me wonder what you each think about the value or importance of teaching religion in public schools. Not inculcating students in religious doctrine per se, but teaching about religion. Do you think that would be important or helpful?
Yeah, it's always it's an interesting piece. Always a bit of a dilemma in many ways, right? People, the Christmas trees that were in the center of the elementary school when I was growing up, and all of that. So it's such a slippery slope. So I don't know. I think there's a way to bring religious leaders for a panel to talk about. Like, I've done that before. I feel like that's an educational piece, that we're not leaving it to somebody in a particular tradition to do it, but to bring leaders in. So I do a lot of interfaith work with a minister, a priest, and an imam, and so a Hindu priest, and we all sit and we talk about what it means to be together, and we talk about our traditions. So I guess for me, I think depends how you do it.
Well, if we come back to your earlier definitions of religion as inextricable from culture, and we want to teach our young people how to get along with people from different cultures and appreciate different cultures, then it seems like religion would be an aspect of that kind of intercultural understanding.
Well, I mean, I think it would be wonderful if we could teach religion, K through 12 level. But I think about the way history is taught, and it's always been a patriotic history that's taught. It's a history that's designed to celebrate the nation and not actually to understand historical processes. And my fear is that religion would function in a similar kind of way. And given the constraints that teachers in the K through 12 system face, including the political constraints, it's hard for me to imagine how it could be done well. I can imagine how it could be done poorly, but I can't imagine how it could be done well.
Yeah, fair point. All right, well, as with each of these big question events, I hate to do it, but I need to stop the conversation because we've got to leave time for the audience questions as much as I would like to keep digging into these important topics with you two. So first, let me just thank Professor Hart and Rabbi Zimmerman. Your perspectives on these topics are so insightful, and your ideas and comments are giving me, and I'm sure our audience too, lots to think about. So thank you for that. We're now going to turn to the Q&A portion of the event for the next 20 minutes or so. We've been tracking your questions as they've been coming in. But you're also invited to continue to add questions adding them through the Q&A tab. So now I want to welcome back Reverend Erik Christensen, class of 1995, to moderate the Q&A portion of the evening, and we look forward to hearing his perspectives as well. As Erik mentioned in the introduction tonight, he is the pastor to the community and director of worship at the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago, and he's been a pastor for 15 years and brings a wealth of expertise and interesting perspectives to this topic in his own right. Erik, are you ready?
Sure am.
Great. Do we have some questions?
We have lots of questions, and you won't be surprised that our Macalester students and alumni are asking us to get specific and to dig in to some of the most vexing expressions of public religion shaping American politics and political discourse right now. So I'd actually like to push a little further on where you were just at the end of the conversation about how you would teach about these sorts of subjects. We have a question from Kayla Nussbaum, class of 2013, who asks, she says, I'm teaching a semester on world religions as a 7th grade humanities teacher. What are the key takeaways you'd want a teacher like me passing on to her students about the intersections of religion, politics, and our current socio-political climate, both domestically and internationally?
Well, we could do a
So
whole nother
cognizant
hour.
that there are kind of guardrails on these sorts of conversations, what would you want to say to a group of 7th graders?
That's a very difficult question. Because it's not always clear to me what I will say to a group of undergraduates here at Macalester. So rather than saying anything specific, I think I would say something about what kind of dispositions I hope that I might be able to cultivate in the students. And I know this is going to sound trite, but an awareness of the fact that there are many, many different ways of being religious, cultivate not an uncritical respect, but a respect for the various differences in religious life and religious expression. Beyond cultivating those dispositions, I'm not quite sure what on a content level I could actually communicate, because it's hard teaching, and I'll use this language, a so-called world religions course at a college. In fact, I have philosophical problems with the very notion of a world religion. It conjures all kinds of problems that I have to sort of get into right away. What makes a religion a world religion? Does that mean that some religions aren't world religions? What kind of criteria is being, so I might want to create a critical disposition in my 7th grade students to that very concept of a world religion and what that way of conceptualizing religion does. What does it exclude? what does it say about those religious traditions that aren't given the honorific of world religion?
Rabbi Zimmerman, do you want to get in on this one?
Well, I think that the age-appropriate response, a seventh grader is very different than a college freshman or sophomore, right? And it's the beginning of their questioning. They're in this really new thing. Like, they've been wearing a pair of glasses all their lives. They've been brought up in a religious tradition. And especially if they are brought up within Christianity, which is the dominant religion. So they really haven't had to think about anything else, as those of us who have, are in dominant positions don't always have to even think of it. And so they are ready to begin to look at other traditions, as I like to say to my seventh graders who are bar bat mitzvah, right? That it is actually time for them to try on different glasses, to try on the different pieces of other traditions and see how they differ and are the same. Everyone I'm talking to has been brought up within Judaism, so I want them to compare and contrast and push against things, and they want to be treated like adults. They want to be treated like thinking individuals who we care about what they're asking and what they're thinking. And so when you talk about religion, it just opens up these possibilities of change and difference and growth. I guess when I think of world religions, I think of all the religions. I'm not thinking of one religion as a world religion. I'm thinking world religion meaning all religions. That's what I hear in the question. And that's when I think I go back to inviting local ministers, priests, rabbis, imams, and having them experience a panel of people who are different, who understand that they can be in conversation, to model that, to model dialogue, to model understanding and friendship, and places where you cannot agree. And that is also powerful. So when you're talking about world religions, it's not what's the symbolism of the holiday of this or that or that. It really is this interplay between religious traditions and leaders that I would portray. I don't know where you're teaching, but there's always people in the community who could come and help.
Thank you. A number of our questions coming in ask us to take an ethical position with regard to the rise in influence and power of the religious right and its corrosive impacts on our democracy. And what's embedded in a number of these questions, and I think I just want to sort of lift this up as a tension in the conversation, is a tension between what Dr. Hart was describing at the beginning of our conversation about religious identity and religious practice as a discourse that sort of moves beyond the neat confines of sort of religious brand names like evangelical Christianity or mainline Protestantism, and is actually sort of a category of collective behavior and worldview shared by people, so that we can have a civic religion, or we can have a national religion, which isn't the same as saying a particular denominational affiliation, but it's more about kind of religion viewed through more of an anthropological lens or a cultural lens. But our community is saying, how do we call out and how do we name the unethical or the corrosive or the damaging impacts of forms of religion or forms of religious collusion between money and power and religious identity, such that it harms civic society and it harms people, or, to use religious language, it harms the neighbor. So what are the resources that we have coming from within our religious traditions? And what are the resources that we have outside of our religious traditions to take an ethical position with regard to how religion is used in the public square?
welcome to the world, everybody. Like, really, I think Jesus had this as a problem. I think Moses had this as a problem. Unfortunately, we're not going to, in the question, I'm feeling the pressure of finding an answer for all of you. But it's the reality of anything, right? Anything can become a sword. Academia can become a sword. It can be misused. Religion can become a sword. It can be misused. So definitely. And there have been lots of things. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like, or but maybe it will, that in, the Torah, Korach is not a nice person. He wants personal power, and he questions Moses's ability to lead, and the earth swallows him up. So there you go. We can't bank on that one, though. So it's the idea that we have to, as messy as it is, confront unacceptable. What happened at the Capitol is unacceptable. Camp Auschwitz t-shirts, not okay, right? I mean, that is, so we have to have some sense of this is not okay. We can't be so liberal-minded that our brains fall out, as one rabbi once taught me. So there is, and so what do? We have to organize, we have to protest, we have to fight that sense and not let it go unchecked. And that is what Elie Wiesel said. Neutrality helps the oppressor, not the victim. And so how do we find that way? Religion is going to be used that way. Maybe for some, that's the reason they don't want to have anything to do with it. That's the reason I am in this, to roll up my sleeves and be in the fight, because the fight is really important to me. I don't want to be silenced, and I want to have a say. And for me, Judaism gives me that lens.
I guess I'll be a little bit of a skunk in my response to the question. I think that the question about the rise of the religious right presupposes that the kinds of expressions that we associated with the religious right is something that has arisen recently. Mm-hmm. It goes back to the very foundations of our nation. That's part of what I was talking about when I talked about the American, this mythology of America as a conquering, redeeming nation. Mm-hmm. That whole notion of America as special, unlike European nations, a city on a hill, American exceptionalism. These are rooted in Anglo-Saxon chauvinism, and the notion that Anglo-Saxons were favored by God, and that if they were true to God, God would be true to them. This ties in with the whole notion of manifest destiny, that God destined the Anglo-Saxon race to overspread the American continent, to mix their labor with the land, as John Locke would say, and make it their property. These notions are foundational for many of the things that are being expressed by people in the religious right now. So what I would say is, don't assume that the gap between the religious right and establishment forms of Christianity are as great as you might think they are. So that would be one response to it. And then I would just co-sign everything that the rabbi has said.
Only
And
thing
I co-sign what you say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is us. This is us, but we can do better.
This is us, and at the same time, what I hear in the question, what can we do? The answer I want to give for that has to do with calling upon a moral virtue, and that's courage. And regardless of whether or not one has a religious tradition, there is a moral virtue that calls upon all of us to find the fortitude to challenge injustice where we see it.
Thanks. I'll share an anecdote here, because there's something in a number of the questions, a strain that I see that sort of strikes a familiar note in me, and it's the impulse to call out white evangelical Christianity. And I'll just say, I'm going to speak from my own location as a pastor within the mainline Protestant tradition and say, when a young white shooter walked into Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, that was a young Lutheran, a young white mainline Protestant who walked into that church. And by virtue of which state in the nation he was in, because he was in the South, there were some automatic associations that got made that he must have been a young white evangelical, or that his religious identity must align with kind of common Northern assumptions about a kind of privileged place for mainline Protestants. But in his new book, White Too Long, Bob Jones, who's the director of the Public Religion Research Institute, shows how in the 2016 presidential elections, white voters across white Catholicism, white Protestantism, white evangelicalism overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump as the president of the United States, and that the sorts of divisions that we often make in our public conversations and categorizations of one another or of sects or branches of Christianity often assign to evangelicalism kind of the sins and indiscretions that are just as common among white Catholics and white Protestants. So one of the things that I, moving from McAllister and moving from Minnesota to Atlanta, Georgia, to go to seminary in the South, one of the things that I encountered right away was the specific ways that people who are raised or who spend a lot of time in the upper Midwest take on a sort of special form of that myth-innocence. That there's something different about the kind of liberal progressive values of mainline Protestantism in the upper Midwest that protects us from the kinds of arguments that we want to level against white evangelicals. But the data doesn't bear that out, that white Protestants in the upper Midwest actually show lots of common behavior and common cause with white evangelicals and white Catholics in different parts of the country. And the common denominator is whiteness. Mm-hmm. So it brings us back to these questions about civil religion versus a religious identity, and the deep roots between racial identity and religious identity. With that in mind, Chloe Moore, class of 24, asks, are there actions we can take to remove religious influence from our politics? So this is another of these broad questions that asks us.
Short answer, no. Short answer, no.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that even if we could, I'm not sure that we should. Because if I'm right and religion is an index of human behavior, from our genocidal worst to our self-sacrificial best, why would we want to remove it from politics? The question is enhancing those forms of religiosity that enhance our common life and suppressing those forms of religion that degrade it.
Totally agree, and I think that it's again, it's that sense that there's good and bad and everything. We so want to bifurcate, because what I'm hearing in this conversation is religion either has to be all good or all bad. It's what I've said, right? It's the idea that we are much more complicated and complex, and when we begin to bifurcate things in order to simplify, it's really, we don't bring out the best or the most mature sense of self, right? Sense of self is whole person theory. And my light went out, but my light that was delivered from McAllister. So it's this question of how do we have both good and bad, and try our hardest to move ourselves into that positive, the common good, with a religious voice and a religious energy. I mean, we want it from our physicians, right? We don't want them to pray over us, but we want them to have a deep sense of whatever ethics they want and understand, because they'll show up better when they have a scalpel in their hand. And so we want people to be driven by an ethical system of some kind and a moral sense of self. And not to leave it at the door in the same way that it's for them doesn't mean that you have to put it on somebody else, but if we can all come together in a common understanding of helping those who have been left behind in a system that is unfair, then we need to do that. And I think, Erik, you're taking on that responsibility of what it means to be mainline Protestant and calling it out. That's how we can authentically show up. The Jewish community, we've always thought of ourselves as, from Western Europe and Eastern Europe, but it is so not true. 20% of our community is of color. 20% of our community is from all the different places in the world. Moses was never white. Sarah and Abraham were brown-skinned. Why do we think that there is this sense of that we all look like me, from Russia? So I guess for me, it's a reckoning within religious traditions that has to happen and a reckoning outside.
Thanks so much to everyone for the questions that you submitted. We tried to synthesize some of them into some common themes, and thanks to our panelists for your responses to tonight's question. I want to turn this back over to President Rivera to ask one last question.
Thanks so much. We've talked about so many things tonight, and to be honest, some of them can sound a little bit discouraging. So I want to make sure that we wrap up on an optimistic note. So what I want to ask our panelists is, what are some things we each can do to foster human connection in ways that break down divisiveness and unite us based on our shared humanity, regardless of differences in religious traditions? What's giving you hope about our ability to do that?
So I feel like I'm taking on Professor Hart's question in the question. I don't think our shared humanity is necessarily the way to go forward, in all honesty. I think it is in the differences, and it is in the acknowledgement of our own biases and our own, the many lenses that come into our reality where we jump and assume so many things. So I call the question whether, of course, we're all human. That's important. We all grew up with Sesame Street that told us we all have a heart and we all have a lung and we all have, lungs and our inside organs are the same. But I actually think that the hope resides in how we do the conflict and how we understand the differences. That's the agenda, I think, before us right now.
Right, thanks. How about you?
I like that response. I guess I might tweak it a little bit. I think it's always a question of the play of sameness and difference. I think that if we only focus on the differences, I think that can be problematic. So I think that there are ways of talking about our basic commonalities which have ethical power, and can move people to behave in pro-social kinds of ways. But, our similarities, I agree with you. We're all human is not enough. That we're human in wildly and radically different ways. And so we do have to always also accent the very, very different ways in which we are human. So for me, it's this constant interplay between our sort of baseline commonalities and our extraordinary differences, and trying to find a way, groping our way to, communicating, with respect and care, across those differences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always like to say it this way, and you'll love this, Dr. Hart. God doesn't make mistakes. Boy, do we as human beings make a lot of mistakes.
A good note for us to wrap on. So let me just, before we're going to head out to Remo, I need to give some thanks. I want to give a very sincere thank you to Professor Hart, to Rabbi Zimmerman, and also to Reverend Christensen for hosting the Q&A. I also want to thank all of you in the audience for your thoughtful questions that elevated our discussion tonight. We really appreciate you sharing your perspectives. I'm looking forward to the next phase of the evening where we'll have some networking. And before we start that, we're going to hear from one more person on our program. So I want to welcome Jana Hong, class of 2017, who is a loyal class agent and MAC ambassador and a psychology technician for the Minneapolis VA healthcare system. She will share her McAllister story with us. Jana, are you ready?
Ready. So, hello, my name is Jana Hong, she, her, hers. As President Rivera said, I'm one of the lead class agents for the class of 2017, and I'm really glad that I was able to tune into this big questions. I actually took Slaves, Animals, and Fetuses with Bill Hart when I was at McAllister, and it was one of my favorite classes. Bill is not only extremely knowledgeable about religion, politics, and rhetoric, but he's an excellent teacher, and he knows how to help students think critically and build their own rhetorical skills. So thank you, Bill. It was wonderful to hear you speak and lecture again. And I always try to attend every MAC event that I can, especially this year. There have been so many changes both at McAllister and in the world this past year. And I appreciate opportunities like Big Questions when I get to hear from MAC professors, community leaders, and guest speakers about their views on the changes that are happening and on current events. Another reason why I enjoy attending MAC events is because I absolutely love getting to meet and talk with current students and other alumni. In past years, I've attended MAC's Volunteer Summit, where I've been able to meet incoming first-year students and hear from alumni about their time at MAC. Getting to know other people in the MAC community reminds me that McAllister, it's a lot more than an institution. For me, especially since graduating, McAllister is first and foremost its people. MAC is its students interning at nonprofits in the community, debating ethics, economics, and policy, and participating in and conducting research. McAllister is also its alumni who protested segregation in the 1960s and the Vietnam War in the 1970s, who have gone on to win Grammys, become superheroes, and serve their communities around the world, and who advocated for racial and economic justice on campus, which in turn helped create the new racial equity support and student emergency aid designations of the McAllister Fund. Over the last few years, you might have heard the phrase McAllister moment. My own McAllister moment was after I graduated, when I was listening to alumni from the last 50-odd graduating years share their McAllister moments. That was when it really hit me that McAllister and its community did not start and end with my time at MAC. McAllister's community began long before I stepped foot on campus, and it did not cease to exist once I graduated. There are alumni who supported me when I was attending McAllister, and now as an alumna, it's my turn to reach back and help the students who come after me. And MAC students really need our support right now. If you can, please donate to McAllister and support the incredible faculty like Professor Hart, the amazing staff who helped advocate for and create the new racial equity support designation, and the students who can benefit so much from a donation to the financial aid or student emergency aid designations. And if you cannot decide which designation to support, then you can support it all and donate so that you help everyone in the MAC community. When you donate to McAllister, you donate to the students, the staff, the faculty, and all that they do, and it does make a difference to them. I cannot say with enough sincerity, as a student who benefited from alumni support, just how much of a difference it makes. And if you're looking for other ways to get involved, be on the lookout for a follow-up email to tonight's Big Questions, which will have information about virtual events, college updates, opportunities to connect with faculty, and more. You can also check out the MAC Together webpage for more information about MAC community events and ways to stay connected. Thank you all for attending. We'll now close out the event with a tradition that reminds us of the values that the McAllister community holds dear, the Peace Prayer, led by McAllister's current students.
เมื่อเฮาเริ่มออกเดินทางไปคนละสายขอให้พวกเฮาถูกหล่อเลี้ยงด้วยมิตรภาพและการเรียนรู้ที่แสนยาวนานขอให้เฮาใช้สิ่งเหล่านั้นสร้างโลกที่มีความยุติธรรมและสงบสุขยิ่งขึ้นโลกที่เต็มไปด้วยมิตรสหายและญาติพี่น้องความเคารพและเมตตาซึ่งกันและกันและความหวังเพื่ออนาคตที่ดีกว่าเก่า
अब हामी आफ्नो जिन्दगीको नयाँ यात्रामा अघि बढ्दा हाम्रो वर्षौंदेखिको मित्रता र शिक्षाबाट हामी सिन्चित हुन सकौं र यसलाई आधार बनाई अझै न्यायपूर्ण र शान्तिमय सद्भाव र सम्बन्धले गाँसिएको र एक अर्काप्रति आदर र करुणा गर्ने उज्जवल भविष्यको संसार सृजना गर्न सकौं.
As we depart along our separate roads, May we be nourished by our years of friendship and learning, and may we draw upon them to create a more just and peaceful world, a world filled with fellowship and kinship, with respect and kindness for one another, and with the hope of a better tomorrow.
Thank you for attending tonight's Big Questions event. Please join us to continue the conversation in Remo. Click the link in the chat to join the Remo room. Remember to turn your camera and mic on and double-click on any empty blue chair to move tables. You can find friends by searching in the chat window. If you are having difficulty, message McAllister staff in the Zoom chat for help joining the Remo room. Remo will remain open until 8:45 p.m. Thank you, and have a great night.